Hello everybody and welcome to this lovely holiday weekend. We will not be joined by Mr. Benjamin Banks today because he is currently in time out. I was trying to get set up and we were just not leaving the wires, the stand, the light, nothing alone. Like, nope, not going to do it, not going to have it. There it is. So anyway, that's the way it is. So I do have, say hi. She's going to smack me in a minute. She's definitely queen of the house and does not appreciate being picked up and manhandled for other people's attention. But there she is. Anyway, all right. We do have lovely Halo here today. Say hi, Halo. Halo. Hi. Okay, so anyway, so the last we had, Jason arrived back at the house, had some lovely times with Tyler, of course. Realized that Penny and Eggy had some of the sparkle magic in them from when he was doing his God touch, or soul touch, as one of my peeps said. Yeah, so this has been, he's feeling bad about Eggy once he wakes up and they talk about their history and kind of get into this. He realizes that he should have been sitting and thinking, and he wasn't. He was like, having a very bad bellyache time. So anyway, so he's feeling bad. Jason says, nope, don't feel bad. You're perfectly fine on sitting and thinking. Just, your ideas and suggestions help. That's it. So we're going to pick up just a tiny bit in chapter 33, then we're on to chapter 34. In the same way you are helping me, you can suggest ideas and strategies for battle, or really anything else I'm trying to do. But at the end of the day, I have to come up with my own strategies that work for me. Your ideas and thoughts are always welcomed, but my success and failure doesn't depend on you alone. I could tell he was going to sit and think on that for a while, so I quickly diverted his attention. Chapter 34, Rune Theory. There is something I could use your advice on right now, I said. I realized how to make my own shield and have Red and his Hex network protect me from magic attacks. I need protection against physical attacks also, and to that end I've managed to get my hands on the Force Rune. It seems to have a lot of options though, so I was wondering if you had any insight into how to figure out rune variations. I was really just reaching for something for Eggy to work on that would be productive. I didn't really think he'd have any insight, at least not right away, which is why I was totally shocked when he perked up and eagerly started sending me images. Oh yes, I know that rune well. My master worked with it all the time. It was the foundation of his forging, and he often used it in most of his creations. I even had a variation of the rune etched on me when I was a sword. He sent us images of the tools his master had used in his forging, and the Force Rune was present in all of them. But it wasn't just the four birds and the horizon line like I'd found. Instead, these images that Eggy showed me had lots of variations. Sometimes the birds were off-centered or different sizes, or they had different accent lines. The images were not as clear as I'd liked. I'm not sure if it was because it was a long time ago, or if it was because Eggy never really got a good look at them. The most shocking thing was when he showed the Force Rune that had been worked into his own design. That was crystal clear, and it was certainly different from the one I'd gotten from Biddy. For starters, the horizon line was in the middle, with four birds on top and two birds mirrored on the bottom. There was also a solid line that went through the middle and ran the entire length of the sword. Was your creator a rune master? I asked incredulously. No, he wasn't. He figured out all the runes on his own, Eggy said proudly. Eggy clearly loved his creator, even though he was long gone. Other mages thought he was a genius, and Oops. And it was his tools that let him make all of his creations. He told us the reason he could make us the way he did was because he was a good listener. He listened to his magic, and he listened to his runes. Was he a sonic mage then, I asked? I was thinking of Annabeth and how she listened to the charms Sandy made to see if they were good or not. Annabeth had helped me out a lot when I'd first made tea. She said my early attempts at the healing rune sounded horrible. No, he wasn't a sonic mage either, Eggy continued. He was just very in touch with magic, like you are. He would make something and give it all the runes and materials it needed to do what he wanted. Then he'd spend a week with it, just listening to see how it performed. He'd draw up new plans, changing the shape and the runes slightly, and then melt the old tool down and reforge it anew. He said the magic and the runes always told him the next step. His job was just to listen and follow where they led. Your creator sounds really smart, I told him. This matches what I've learned. Blah, blah, blah. Your creator sounds really smart, I told him. This matches what I've noticed about magic. It seems to have a will of its own, and it wants to be helpful. I know mages think of magic like an energy, like heat or electricity, but I think it's more than that. For me, magic has feelings. The cobalt slug felt hateful. The neutral magic in you felt lost and confused. The stolen magic in Big Ugly was very unhappy and wanted to be free. I just never thought of runes the same way. To me, they have just been a series of lines that become filled with magic and then do something. If a mage doesn't get the lines right, then the charm blew up. Discovering the runes has flow was a huge thing for me and made total sense. I just haven't gotten the runes to feel like they are alive, though. I stopped talking because I realized I was just going to repeat myself. Runes were just runes, right? They were just lines. When Sandy had shown me the light rune, she'd said a rune let you use magic like you had an affinity for it. She'd said it announced to the world what effect you wanted your magic to take. It was sort of like Hermione casting a spell in the world of Harry Potter. If she said the right word and waved her wand the right way, she achieved a magic effect. I'd always thought of runes like that, only without the wand. It was like Biddy had said, mages painted the rune in the air, or had it in stone and they cast through it, but the rune didn't change. In modern magic, they added all that extra stuff to it, like constraints and triggers to get what they wanted out of it, but runes weren't alive. Someone is sounding an awful lot like Susan from the Grand Circle, my analytical side noted. She said there was no way mages could be ready for a circle of that magnitude in a few hours, and yet they were. She said naturals couldn't be part of a circle, and yet they were. And you normally love your figuring out new things and discovering how magic really works. Why are you so hung up on runes? I don't really know, I replied. I was feeling awfully stubborn for some reason. I was also feeling frustrated and aggravated. What was going on? That wasn't like me. I guess I'm feeling upset about the force rune, I said slowly. As I spoke, I was uncovering the layers of my own hang-up. I feel like it's the last part of my defense that needs to come together. I thought I'd found what I needed, and now I'm hearing that the force rune could be a whole bunch of different ways. It feels like the finish line has shifted, and I'm starting my journey all over again. It feels like I may never get to the finish line, like there may be thousands of force runes, and I'll never find the right one. As I said it, I could hear my own whining. My God, I sound like a spoiled kid. Ugh. I can see images of you rolling around on the floor, crying and having a fit, Penny spoke up. This seems strange. Is it a new fleshy tradition? I had forgotten for a minute that we were all mentally connected, so they could see and feel my upset too. Only very young fleshy creatures do that, I replied. Once we get older, we grow out of actually doing that, and instead we find other bitchy ways to express ourselves. Oh, Penny said, but she sounded confused. Her and Eggy buzzed for a moment in stone speak. I'm pretty sure they were wondering if their human source needed a hug. Would it help if I told you the story of my creation? Eggy asked. Yes, it would, I replied. Just give me 1 sec. Something was triggering me, but I had the tools to break the cycle. I just needed to accept I was feeling this way. I took a deep breath, held it, let it out, and then I did it again. I accepted that I was aggravated and frustrated, and I accepted that I wasn't completely sure why. It was amazing how much power acceptance had. It wasn't long, and the upset started fading away like a bad mist. I wasn't resisting it, so it didn't stick around. I would figure it out. I always did. Maybe I wouldn't use the perfect force rune the first time, but I'd keep trying, and the results would get better and better, even if it took a while. My shield would protect me from magical and physical threats, and over time it would improve and become more effective. This was just a minor hiccup on my path of magical growth. Actually, it's not even a hiccup, my analytical side chimed in again. This is actually an awesome opportunity. Normally, you'd be like every other mage out there and just assume one variation of a rune was all you needed. You'd find a rune that was close to what you wanted and just stop looking. Now you no longer have that blind spot. Now you know that runes change, and it's not just little lines and tweaks around the edges. Most importantly, Eggy might know even more about how his master changed the runes to suit his needs. You'll never be a rune master, but you might end up being the next best thing. So stop your whining and listen up. Those are wise words from my better self. So I followed his advice, shut up, and let Eggy know I was ready to listen. Some of this story I remember as my master used the same steel over and over again to make all my versions. He had a theory that the materials used in making charms retained some of their magic, even when they were melted down. He was right, because I can clearly remember the last stages of my own evolution. Some of this story I know from just what my master told me. He adored all of us awakened charms, and we all loved to hear how we were formed. It was like a lullaby to us. He paused for a minute, lost in his memories of have a happier time. Then he focused back on us again. Here is the tale of my creation. His mental voice started taking on a sing-song quality. We were now his tribe, and he was getting ready to pass on his history from over 1,000 years ago. I leaned forward, listening. It was story time. My master was a good fighter. Not a great one, but a good one, and he mostly fought with his magic and fists. He was a blacksmith by trade when he was human, and he continued that profession as a supernatural. His magic was powerful and his strength was strong, so he defended himself well in his early years. As he grew older, though, the mages who challenged him started relying more and more on their enchanted weapons. At the time, he wasn't that familiar with making weapons, as he mostly made small charms and jewelry. So he brought an enchanted sword, and it let him down. Swearing to only rely on his own creations from then on, he made his first sword, and that was my very first form. He sent us an image of a basic short sword. It wasn't bad, but it looked heavy and dull. My master quickly realized there were many variations of swords, and many ways of fighting with them. Some swords are striking swords, and they are meant to be fast and sharp. Some swords are power swords, and they are best at blocking strikes and clubbing your opponent down. Some swords try to be good all-rounders, so they can defend well and strike quickly. Eggy sent out images of different types of swords and what they were best at. As you can imagine, my form changed a lot as my master tried different styles. He learned to fight from different teachers, and I gradually changed as he developed a way of sword fighting that worked for him. Eggy showed a montage of swords where he got lighter and slimmer, then longer and heavier. then much thicker and really heavy, and finally back to being slimmer again. I don't remember any of this, as he hadn't even started adding runes yet. He was on version 23 when he added his first rune, and it was something he thought would keep my edges sharp. This time I saw wavy lines etched all up the blade. I didn't get a good look as Eggy switched images and continued his story. It wasn't long after that when my master almost lost a finger in a fight, and the Handguard was added. The sword became a bit longer and heavier to balance out the new basket weave of steel around the handle, protecting the hand of the wearer. Eggy sent out images of several variations of that, but they were only minor changes. The Force Rune, as you called it, was added at version 39, and I became aware at version 45. I was happy to see the first version of the Force Rune he added was the same one I'd found at the stacks and piles. He tried larger versions of the birds, using more birds, and adding additional horizontal lines. Once I was awake, he dropped all other runes as I could keep myself from rusting and maintain my own edge. All the other etchings disappeared, and now it was just the Force Rune present. Eggy also became longer and heavier. I was just guessing, but I assumed that the Force Rune let Eggy's master handle the sword a lot easier, so he could afford to add more reach and more weight. The biggest change to the rune was when he flipped it completely around. Now the horizontal line was at the bottom. Then he added some lines below it. Now the birds were on both sides of the horizontal line. And finally, he added the center line to it all. That was version 52, and it was my final form. I was finally exactly the way my master needed me to be. Eggy finished his story and fell into a peaceful silence. He told the story like he was quoting from his favorite book. "Wow," I said. "Eggy, that was just wonderful. Thank you so much for telling that to us. I can't believe you went through so many changes to end up in your final form. Do you know how long all that took?" "It took about 40 years, he replied. "The first versions went pretty quickly, but towards the end, he was trying out about one new change a year." I took a moment to process that. I was frustrated after a few days of searching for the right rune. This guy had spent 40 years working on his masterpiece. I suddenly felt very grateful for how quickly I'd gotten the Force Rune and how easily my shield matrix had come together. My shield wasn't going to take 40 years to finish up. Something started tickling in the back of my brain. There was something in Eggy's story that related to the whole concepts of runes. Something big. I focused on it, but whatever the idea was, it just squirmed and ran away. Damn. I let it go and moved on. It would surface when it was ready. I have a question, Eggy, about how you became aware. When you were telling your story, it sounded like you became aware because you had so much magic and iterations put into you over and over again. Sandy has older charms, though, and they aren't awake or aware. Many of them have been used a lot longer than 40 years, too. Why did you wake up and her charms haven't? My master had the same question, as I wasn't the only one of his creations to eventually wake up. He wondered if we became aware because we'd been formed by the same mage over and over. He thought that the forging locked in his magic, and over time it was enough to make us wake up. As for older charms, they might get used a lot, but that isn't the same as being forged. Also, charms are traded between mages, so their magic source would change. My master thought that only one mage could awaken a charm. Also, charms are filled with neutral magic from charging circles. According to him, neutral magics can't awaken a charm either. Since we've heard Eggy's origin story, I'd like to hear mine too. Penny spoke up. I told her the story before, but it felt different now I knew how much awakened charms like to hear how they were created. This was Penny's very own lullaby. I told them both about recovering from my waker moment and having my first dinner with Sandy and the crew. I sent images of talking about charms and magic, and Sandy raising the training circle. I told how horrible it was to get so low on magic, and how my first brave granny had vacuumed up as much magic as she could, and then sacrificed herself to bring Penny to life. Eggy and Penny hung on every word and savored every image. This clearly was special to them, so I remembered everything I could about these moments. When I was done, there was a moment of silence. Penny, your awakening is truly marvelous, Eggy said. To be of service to your source so early in his life is a thing of wonder. I'm so happy to have met you and to now be part of this family. He paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I would have thought that as the older charm, I would have been the one to teach you. Instead, you have taught me. Your ability to move and manipulate magic is better than mine, and your ability to change your shape is awe-inspiring. If I had learned that ability long ago, I would never have needed to be reforged again. I could have just changed my form to fit whatever my master needed. He said something else, but I totally missed it. Instead, I latched onto the words, form, shape, change. The idea was almost there. And then I had it. Eureka! I mentally hollered. Eureka, eureka, eureka! What is this? Eggy sounded confused. It's when you run around in nothing but your flesh suit and scream Eureka, Penny said wisely. It's a ritual he does when he gets an idea. Apparently it was invented by a guy long ago who put gold into a bathtub. Really? Eggy sounded perplexed. That sounds very strange. In all my years, I've never seen anyone do this before. The guy was Archimedes, I replied, and he was a very famous mathematician and inventor. In fact, he invented pi. Oh, that would explain it, Penny said brightly. I know humans love pie. Never mind that, I said quickly. We were getting off track and we needed to celebrate the moment. I changed our landscape to an ancient city street, threw off my imaginary clothes, and ran down the street naked. Eureka! Eureka! I got to the end of the street and looked back. Penny and Eggy were still standing there, looking at me like I was crazy. Then Penny shrugged and her Athena outfit vanished. She was now a 6-foot, naked Amazon woman with silver skin, copper hair, and perky breasts. She laughed like tinkling bells, then sprinted down the street toward me, yelling, Eureka! Eureka! When she reached me, she turned and we both looked at Eggy. He gave a long, heavy sigh, and then his liquid metal morphed until he was naked too. I was shocked at just how hot he looked. He looked like Michelangelo's David come to life. His first few Eurekas weren't very convincing, but then he got into the spirit of it all. By the time he reached us, we were all smiling at each other. We then took off down another street, dancing and yelling Eureka. The whole thing was way more fun than it should have been. Somewhere in here, my analytical side joined in, and even Bermuda made an appearance. He wasn't naked, of course, but he enjoyed running down the street with us. I even made some colorful maracas for us to shake as we ran. They were from a completely different time and culture, but it was my Eureka moment and I could do whatever I wanted. Eggy especially got into it and started shaking out a beat for us to run to. Peggy backed him up, and our Eureka Dash turned more into a birthday suit Mardi Gras parade. This is wondrous fun, Penny finally spoke up, and I can see why humans enjoy doing this activity. I am curious, though. What idea are we celebrating? I flexed my will and the scene changed to a hilltop overlooking the city. I put a giant picnic blanket on the ground and placed a picnic basket filled with cheese, fruit and wine on it. We might as well enjoy ourselves while we talked. Bermuda started padding through the grass and chasing bugs as we summoned our imaginary clothes and sat down. I finally understand runes, I said, and everybody looked shocked. Okay, I don't somehow know how to make every rune in existence, but I have a unifying theory for runes, and I know how to work with them. I paused dramatically and everyone leaned forward listening. I wasn't sure exactly how to explain it, so I just started talking. Runes are like a kitchen knife. They can do a lot of things, but they're better if you get exactly what you need. That went over like a lead balloon. Even my analytical side looked confused. I took a deep breath and tried again. When I was a little kid, I had an old table knife. It was dull and slightly bent, so my mom figured I couldn't hurt myself and let me play with it. I used that knife on everything. I used it like a screwdriver to get the screws out of the grate. I used it as a lever to pry my toys apart and see how they worked. It was very dull, but it would still cut, so I used it to saw twigs in half. When I read about King Arthur, it became my sword of the round table, and when I read my first Western, it became my six-shooter. I put it in my pocket to quick draw for my gunfights. I can understand that, Eggy said seriously. However, I do not understand how this relates to runes and why you are so excited. Runes give magic the shape we work with, I said simply. So one rune makes my magic like a table knife. Another rune makes my magic round like a stone, and another rune might make magic fly like a bird. They still weren't getting it. Eggy, you gave me the idea when you talked about how your master changed your shape many times to suit his fighting style. You were a sword, but there are all different kinds of swords, and they are all used to fight in different ways. Let's go back to the kitchen knife idea. If I only had one rune that made my magic like a table knife, I'd use it in a variety of ways that I just mentioned. That's where most mages stop, and that's where I would have stopped. I found a force rune and would have used it everywhere, just like it was. Even though the table knife can do a lot of these things, it doesn't do them all well. If I gave it a better handle, a harder shaft, and a flat edge in front, it now becomes a much better screwdriver. If I made it wider with a flat edge, it would be great for spreading butter and jams. If I gave it a serrated edge, it would be a great steak knife. If I made it longer with a reinforced tip and a sharp edge, it would be a great dagger. In a way, all these are variations of a table knife, and that's what your master was doing, Eggy. He started with a rune that was close to what he needed, and then modified its effect until it's exactly what he wanted. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with the old-fashioned force rune I have and modify it till it's exactly the shape I need. The underlying idea was so simple. I don't know why I hadn't seen it before. It fit what Eggy's master had done. It also fit with what Sandy had said when she talked about the light rune. She said it was really great for bright white light, but was less useful if you needed different lighting. The real power of this idea was that I didn't need to find a perfect rune. Instead, I could change a rune into what I needed. So if I wanted a rune that worked with red light, I could take the light rune I had and figure it out. I wasn't a rune master, but I was now a lot closer. Penny and my analytical side look excited. They got it. But Eggy still looked skeptical. I get the idea of changing shapes, he said. That makes perfect sense to me. But magic is so much more than a shape. It can be anything. How does your idea work with that? I gave a shape as an example, I replied, because it's so easy to understand. Magic is more of an effect, but the same idea applies. For example, do I need to make something hot? If so, how hot do I need it? How big is the heated area? Does it need to heat up quickly or cool down quickly? These are the effects, and I'm sure a heat rune would determine the parameters of the heat. I just need to change the rune until I get the effects I want. Eggy nodded in agreement. I get it now. But how do you listen to a rune? How do you listen to a shape or an effect? I was surprised with Eggy. These were really great questions. He was putting himself in my place and really trying to understand the process. That's what stumped me originally, I replied. Runes on their own are just shapes and effects waiting to happen. Once it fills with magic, though, it becomes alive. I'm hoping I can hear where the magic is struggling and modify the rune so it is close to the effect as I need. I paused as another idea occurred to me. Actually, I can do even better than that. I just need the right setup, and I can try a whole range of options very quickly. I originally made my surfer dudes so they could test Red and his Hex network, but they are becoming useful for a lot more than that. My analytical side looked at me proudly. This was his type of thinking. I was using my brain for more than just Netflix shows and checking out hot guys. He gave me a deep bow and vanished. His work here was done. Penny buzzed at Eggy, and then they two both bowed and left. I was so excited. I knew what to do. I couldn't wait to get started. I opened my eyes, and the first rays of morning light filled the room. Tyler kissed the back of my neck, and I got goosebumps. Damn, that felt good. "What were you doing?" he asked. "You were talking and moving around a little bit, but I couldn't figure out what was going on." "I was having a eureka moment," I said happily. Then I explained it to Eggy and Penny. The amazing thing about Tyler was he either understood all that or just accepted his boyfriend was a little weird. Maybe a bit of both. "Oh," he breathed in my ear. "That sounds exciting. Tell me what you discovered." One arm curved around me and started playing with my right nipple, as his other hand started stroking my side. I loved when he did that. I loved when he did that. It made me feel lean and sleek and sexy. The excitement of my discovery merged into a whole different kind of excitement, and I found I was starting to gasp and moan as I talked about tableware and dinner knives and all the different shapes it could be. He had a long, hard shape of his own, and he was already behind me, ready to use it. I arched my back and cried out in pure ecstasy as he slipped inside me. He kept asking me questions as he touched me and teased me into a state of pure bliss. For some reason, I kept trying to answer him. I think he got a kick out of it as he kept me right on the edge for a long time. Finally, I gave up and begged for him to just let me have it, which he did. He turned me on so much, one time wasn't enough. He took me to heaven a couple more times before I calmed down enough to let him carry me into the shower. This supernatural body of mine still amazed me. I could train all day and make love all night. Having sex like we did just shouldn't be possible, but it was, and I love every frenzied and tender moment of it. We had breakfast cereal and watched a show together, but then I started feeling restless. "I thought you were going to take it easy today," Tyler asked. "I'd originally planned that, yes," I agreed, "but now I have this idea and I'm anxious to try it out." "Mind if I tag along?" he asked. Then Mr. Tubbles jumped on his lap. "Actually, do you mind if we tag along?" "Of course not," I laughed. "I can always use the support of a handsome fella." Then I grinned at Tyler. "And you're welcome to come too." He poked me in the ribs and I jumped so hard my cereal bowl went flying. Fortunately, it was empty. "No," I commanded him as he gently put Mr. Tubbles on the ground. "Tyler, no!" I hollered as he flexed his tickle fingers and then came for me. I screamed and wiggled and cried, but it was no use. He tickled me till I was a quivering, hot mess. Somehow we ended up kissing, and somehow I found myself wrapped up in his naked body. We made love again, and after it was over, I found myself running my fingers through his hair as he nibbled on my ear. "I can't get enough of you," he whispered. "I love our time together so much." Then he looked deep in my eyes and kissed me again. My gay heart melted, even more than it normally did. Being a supernatural was scary and dangerous, but this right here made up for everything. We had to shower again, of course, but then we gathered up our cat companions and I gathered up my creations and we headed out to the beach. I asked the lead granny to come along and bring her crew with her. This was going to be a lot more exciting than cleaning up the park. I also asked Octa to come as well and bring some of her tangle. When I had finished my fight with Eugene, I'd had a lot of surfer dudes, but I didn't need all of them, so I'd kept 10, including my lead dude, of course, and sent the rest to Penny. Now I needed them again, so they came along too. In a surprising turn of events, Eggy wanted to come along as well. I thought he would want to go back to window sitting, but I guess he was feeling adventurous. My theory was based on the story, so it would be nice for him to be present and see the results for himself. The beach gym was just as amazing as I remembered. The morning breeze coming in off the water was cool, but not cold. The sun was shining bright with the promise of a new day, and the view was just spectacular. I stopped for a moment to take it all in. My new life was crazy sometimes. I didn't notice any changes until I got to our door leading into the locker room. This door was just standing on its own, like some kind of crazy Alice in Wonderland entrance, but now it was definitely bigger. The Grand Matron had said she'd put her own Morphus points towards the gym, so Sandy and John could train here as well. It looked like that included a larger door for John. At 7 foot tall, he's a big guy. Once I went inside, the changes continued. The ceiling was now about 2 feet higher, making the space seem even more open. We now had another sink, another bathroom stall, and another shower, making 3 of everything. The only thing that had more than that was the nice wooden lockers where we hung up our regular clothes and changed into our magically fresh workout clothes. For that, we had 2 extra lockers, one for Sandy and one for John. We dropped off the cats and Bermuda started showing Mr. Tubbles around. Then we changed into our workout clothes, gray shorts and gray t-shirt, and headed outside. The feeling of the sand under my feet was just delightful. I had so many fond memories of this place. It was a wonderful place to train, and all that hard work had certainly paid off. I selected a blank part of the beach to set up my experiment. I usually trained here with Sparkles, my Sandy training partner, so I knew this spot well. I moved a bit to the side, mounted some egg for Sandy, and placed him on top. He now would have a good view of the adventure, and he wouldn't be in the way. I was just about to get started when Annabeth showed up. I got a happy hug, and she quickly changed into workout clothes and joined us. I went over the theory with her and Tyler, and she got it right away. She had her own analogies. Runes were like spoons. They could be a soup spoon or ladle or a spork, or you could go really big and make spades for digging in the garden. Tyler didn't offer an analogy, but he said a few things that let me know he'd been paying attention to my answers, as his hands and lips had teased me into a frenzy of animal lust. My man was quite the multitasker. Now that we were here and everyone was caught up, it was time to start the show. I started with my Ass Blaster 2000, as he needed to get to work making little sandballs. I gave him a long caterpillar body with a big mouth so he could quickly gobble up sand. Then I gave him a thick stomach with multiple chambers so that as the magic moved through it, it could form into round BB gun-like pellets. I gave him a little extra magic to make sure the sand stuck together long enough to fly through the air a few times. I didn't need the pellets for forever, so there was no need to go crazy about it. This time he wasn't going to be aiming on his own, so I just gave him lots of little legs so he could move around. Since this was a beach, I gave him sunglasses and a colorful Hawaiian shirt. Then I added sandals on all his little feet. They looked so cute. I wasn't sure where to add a duplicator ring, so in the end I just added that function to his glasses. I went over him one more time, adding in lots of little details, then put him on the sand, filled him with magic, and turned him loose. He started chomping down the sand and passing it through his chambers. In a few moments, a perfectly formed round pellet of sand popped out his back. "Would you like to give it a throw and see if it holds together?" I asked the lead granny. "Of course," she said enthusiastically, and swooped down to pick it up. "Batter up," she hollered, then tossed the tiny sandball through the air. It was a really good throw, hard and fast, and it traveled for at least 10 feet. I was also happy to see the sandball stayed together and could be thrown again. "All right, Ass Blaster," I said, "it looks like you were good to go. Let's make more of you and you can start working on the ammunition." I was speaking out loud so Tyler and Annabeth could follow along with what was happening. I duplicated my ball pooper several times, and soon we had a pile of ammo on the sand. "Surfer dudes, you're up next," I called, and they gathered in front of me. "You guys had the most important job, as you are going to be the ones listening to the Force Rune and testing variations. You already know the version we found at Biddy's, and this is the version Eggy showed me. I sent them images of Eggy's final rune with the birds on top and I sent them images of Eggy's final words rune with the birds on the top and the bottom. As you can see, this rune is very versatile. It looks like the horizontal line can be on the top or the bottom or even in the middle. The one we got from Biddy has 4 birds, but Eggy's has 6, and I bet it might be possible to have even more. What we are looking for is a force rune that Rune and his team can use to repel physical attacks. Since Rune Red can't fly around on his own, neither can you during this test. You need to use the power of the rune variation you've chosen to force the incoming balls to stop. Grannies and octopuses, your job is the most fun. You guys are going to take these balls that the ass blasters are making and hurl them at the surfer dudes and try to knock them out of the round. Don't focus all your fire on just one dude, as the goal is to find the best rune, and we can't do that unless they are all tested equally. We will have multiple rounds of testing. Surfers, if you get hit 10 times, then you're out. We'll keep going until we're down to 3 dudes left. At that point, the round stops. Surfers, you'll need to modify your defense runes based on how your own versions perform, as well as how everyone else did. Feel free to borrow ideas from those that are successful, but also feel free to go wild and just try anything. Does everyone understand? I got eager nods all around. The idea really wasn't that complicated. It was a magic version of dodgeball, except the defensive side used the force rune instead of moving. "Okay, surfers, get into position," I called. This was going to be exciting. Initially, they all bunched up together, but then they quickly spread out so they were in the same general area, but not so close that they could get hit by sandballs aimed at someone else. "Go," I yelled, and the grannies swooped in, grabbed sandballs, and started throwing. They were a bit tentative at first, but then they got into the spirit of it and really went to town. Most of the sandballs missed or were diverted, but that's where Octa and her tangle came in. They were on the other side of the surfers, and they either caught the balls in their tentacles or picked them up off the ground and threw them back. I already knew Octa was a great thrower because I had seen her in action when the miners had been chipping rocks off of John. I'd added a few kegs of beer for the crew on John, and the ass blasters that had done it had gotten a little drunk and started shooting rock chips at Octa. Her tangle had been quick to gather the small stones and throw them right back. It had been an awesome fight and inspired what we were doing today. The grannies were great at throwing the sandballs, but Octa and her tangle were in a whole other league. They loaded up their tentacles with sandballs, spun like a top, and used all that momentum to shoot them like they were coming out of a machine gun. It was impressive as hell, and they quickly started knocking out the dudes. We were close enough to the action to get hit by some friendly fire, and those little sandballs stung. I thought the surfers would last for a minute at least, but within 15 seconds, they were all out. "That's it. Round's finished," I called. The grannies cheered and all the octopus did a happy dance. The surfers were stunned. Clearly, they thought they would have lasted longer also. "Next round starts in 3 minutes," I called. I was playing referee to keep everyone on track. "Grannies and Tangle, gather up your ammunition. Surfer dudes, strategize and modify your runes for the next round." The surfers huddled up, compared notes, and I listened in. And it seemed like they'd mainly been unprepared this round. They hadn't been sure how to use the force rune for defense, and the sandballs had smacked into them a lot harder and faster than they'd expected. They were much more comfortable being the attacker and using the force rune for speed, but they were up for the challenge. They didn't modify the force rune much for the second round. Instead, they were just trying to get the hang of using it. Everyone was ready in 2 minutes, so we started the round early. The dudes were more prepared, but so were the grannies. Some of them got the idea of holding the ass blasters like they were Nerf guns and letting them shoot the sand pellets right out of their ass. That made their shots right now. That made their shots almost as fast as Octa and her crew, and all the dudes went down even faster this time. I called the round, and this time the dudes were pissed. They huddled up again, compared notes, and started round 3 looking very determined. Octa and the grannies were having a blast, and again they knocked out half the dudes in no time. This round, though, 5 of the dudes held out longer. For about another 10 seconds they held their own before falling one by one. For the first time, I could see some of the sandballs actually stopping, falling apart, or being deflected. I called out lots of encouragement and got everybody ready for round 4. I'd originally said that each round would last until 3 dudes were left, but the Tangle and the grannies were throwing until everyone was out. The dudes accepted the challenge by default, so I just let that rule slide. In round 4, all the dudes lasted for 30 seconds, and one of them lasted for several seconds beyond that. I listened in on their huddle, and now they had the hang of it. They were ready to start experimenting. They were all going to try different things, moving the horizontal line, adding more birds, changing sizes and thickness. The idea was to try a broad range of options over the next few rounds, and then start honing in on what worked. They were doing exactly what they needed to do, so I let them have at it. I kept Tyler and Annabeth up to date on what was going on, and they found it as fascinating as I did. I drew out rune variations in the sand, and we all quickly guessed how well we thought they would do. The ass blasters love shooting sandballs out their heinies, so I ended up having to make 3 of them for every granny, 1 to shoot and 2 to eat sand and reload. Octa and her Tangle were having more fun than ever. Their specialty was holding neutral magic and gradually letting Eggy or the house absorb it. That wasn't exactly the most exciting thing, and this exercise was a wonderful break from their normal routine. Round 5, 6, and 7 allowed the surfers to eliminate a lot of different combinations. Some of them were truly awful, and one surfer was knocked out in 5 seconds flat. On the other hand, round 6 saw one resounding success, and round 7 found another variation that worked very well also. At the end of round 7, I called all my creations over and topped up their magic. The surfers especially needed a refill. For round 8, the surfers decided to get behind the 2 variations that had been very successful and refine them even more. I drew out the variations in the sand for Annabeth and Tyler, and they were surprisingly similar. Both variations had a small horizontal line on the bottom, with the birds coming out of the top. The 5th variation had only 4 birds. The bottom bird was thick and about the same length as the horizon. The next bird was bigger but thinner, and the remaining 2 followed that pattern. The final bird was thin but very large and covered all the birds before. Tyler immediately thought this was the right rune. He said it reminded him of a shockwave. I thought it was the right rune too. If red was the horizon line and the birds were the amount of force, then it was causing the effect I was looking for. The closer the object got to red, the more resistance it faced. The other rune was more like a layer of clouds. Again, the horizon was at the bottom, but the birds were stacked on each other, like cloud layers in a kid drawing. So have a little one, then that one, and then it kind of goes over, and then you have a ding, and then 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 a ding. Yep, you get it. The other room was more like a layer of clouds. Again, the horizon was at the bottom, but the birds stacked on each other, like cloud layers in a kid's drawing. The birds were about the same size, but there were more of them when they spread out further as they moved away from the horizon. Annabeth liked this one, as she said she liked the look of the clouds. Round 8 went very well for the dudes. None of them got knocked out early, and a few of them made it past the 2-minute mark. I listened in on their huddle, and they were now just experimenting with connecting lines and accent marks. It seemed like both runes, 4 birds and the cloud formation, were doing equally well, so they were continuing to refine both of them. For round 9, all of the dudes made it past the 2-minute mark. The Tangle and the Grannies and the Ass Blasters were really struggling to land their shots. "We are ready," the lead dude said simply, and 2 of the surfers stepped forward. The first surfer had the 4-bird design, and it had lots of tiny connector lines. I quickly sketched the rune out in the sand so Tyler and Annabeth could follow along. "Tell me about your force rune," I asked him. They were a crew of few words, so I had no idea what we would get back. "Deflection," he said proudly, "with progressive resistance." He pointed to the connector lines, and suddenly I understood. The horizon connected to the first thick bird. The horizon connected to the first thick bird, but the connector lines were all slanted to the right. The first thick bird connected to the second larger but slimmer bird, and this time all the connectors slanted left. The second bird connected to the third bird, and this time the connectors were slanted to the right. Third bird connected to the final bird, and the connectors were all heavily slanted to the left. What I read from that was the force rune tried to divert the incoming sandball, so it missed. I loved it as it reminded me of a slap block, which was used to redirect an incoming punch rather than stop it. I turned to the surfer with the cloud type rune. "Tell me about your force rune." Tell me about you. "Early detection," he'd said simply, "with progressive resistance." I could see that in his rune too. He didn't have connector lines, as all of his birds touched and built on top of each other, like a cloud drawing. Instead, his rune had lots of accent marks around the edge. They were little wavy lines questing out into the world, searching for danger. "Round 10 is the final round," I declared. "The surfer dudes have discovered 2 variations of the force rune that would work for Red and my defensive shield. Each version has its champion, and they will now go head-to-head in a final test. I'll fill each one of them with magic so they start out even. Grannies and Tangle, be sure and split your shots up evenly between them, as this needs to be a fair fight. A fair test. The last rune standing will be the winner." Bermuda and Mr. Tubbles wandered over and sat down beside Aggie. Better late than never. Bermuda looked at me like, "I'm a cat. I'm never late." I agreed and gave him a quick ear rub. I turned to Tyler and Annabeth. "Any thoughts on which one you think will win?" "I think deflection will serve you best," Tyler said, "so I'm voting for the 4-bird design. I think it will require less energy than trying to stop everything." I nodded and looked at Annabeth. "I think the speed of the fight will have a lot to do with which rune is better," Annabeth said. "The 4-birds design sounds pure and fast, which is what you need in a fight. Your shield needs to react quickly and deflect or stop as needed. On the other hand, the cloud design has layers to it. I feel like it's going to take more magic to power up, and it's going to be slower, but it seems stronger and more efficient to me." She paused thoughtfully. "I think if you were out in the rain and you needed a rune to keep you dry, the cloud rune would be better. For a fight where you have to try and defend against a fist or sword, I think the 4-birds rune would be better." They were both interesting observations. It sounded like Annabeth had suggested that bigger runes with more lines took more power to run. It made sense, but I never really thought about it before. It also sounded like simpler runes were faster. That also made sense, as magic could fill them a lot quicker. I was learning all kinds of new things today. Regardless, it was time for the final round. I felt rising bubbles of excitement. This was it. This was the end of my journey for the Force Rune. This was the final piece of my shield. "Champions, take your places." The 2 surfers smoothly glided into positions. "Ass Blasters, are you ready?" I called. They were full of sand, so they bobbed their head. "Grannies, are you ready?" "Yes, dear," they called back. "Octopus, are you ready?" They wiggled their tentacles and spun in place. "Begin the round," I called, and everyone let loose. It was awesome. Sandballs were flying everywhere. Octa was spinning and shooting sandballs like a railgun. Grannies were throwing or shooting ass blasters. Bermuda and Mr. Tubbles got hit a few times, and sand got all up in their fur, which they did not appreciate. They quickly got up and decided there was something interesting to do somewhere else. I thought that with all the concentrated firepower on just two surfers that the round would be over quickly, but that wasn't the case at all. They dug in, hung on, and managed to stop or deflect all the incoming shots. We crossed the 2-minute mark, then 3, then 4 minutes. They were still at it. Then the surfer with the cloud rune ran out of magic and got bombarded. I guess Annabeth was right. It took more magic to power bigger runes. The winning surfer pumped his fist in the air and took a victory lap, while all my soul creations cheered him on. I quickly filled up the surfer with the cloud rune and thanked him for his help. I didn't want him to feel bad after all. Then I called my winning surfer over, held out my hand, and had him touch down on Red. "Red, are you ready for your force rune?" I asked playfully. He always got so excited when I upgraded him. "Ready? I was born ready," he twinkled. "I stay ready so I don't have to get ready. Hit me with it. I'm ready to use the force." Obi-Wan would be so proud. I zoomed into Red and checked out his Hex Setup. The vines connected the middle of his 6 sides, so it split his surface into 6 areas. The coil that represented his ability to store magic was in the bottom area. The round shield, representing his new responsibility as my defense, was in the top area. And finally, his 4 eyes, 4 ears, and mouth were in the upper right area. I'd originally thought about putting the force rune inside the round shield, but now that seemed like such a small area for something so important. I also wasn't sure if adding a circle around the rune would modify it in some way. Then I thought about taking the shield out, but I still had 3 blank areas, so I might as well keep it. I finally decided to put the force rune in the lower left area. That way everything balanced out. The surfer dudes were right there, so it was very easy to copy the rune over. "Oh wow!" Red was so excited. "I gotta try this out. Somebody hit me." The grannies and the tangle heard him, and suddenly I was being pelted with sandballs. Red whooped and hollered as none of them landed on him, but the rest of me got strafed. "Okay, stop," I yelled, laughing. "I don't have the force rune everywhere yet. Give me a sec." I pushed magic to Red, and he quickly duplicated his setup to his 6 neighborhood hexes. Then they duplicated to their neighbors, and soon the changes were racing up my arm and then all over my body. It only took a few moments. Once the Hex network was updated, I turned the rest of my creations loose. "All right, everybody," I yelled. "Hit me if you can." And that is exactly what they tried to do. I hadn't planned on Annabeth and Tyler getting in the fun, but they grabbed up handfuls of sand and tried to dump it on my head. The surfers were extra happy to switch from sitting duck to attack mode, and they picked up sandballs and joined in the fun. It was really hard to sit there and be a target, as my every instinct was to dodge, roll, or get the heck out of the way. Red and his Hex network were up to the task, though. More than that, they were having a blast too. They deflected, redirected, and just plain stopped all the sandballs from hitting me. Even the sand dumped on my head didn't hit me. Instead, it slid off my shield and ran down the outside of my shirt. "You have a shield," my analytical side said happily. "I have a shield," I repeated. It almost didn't seem real. "You finally have magical and physical protection," he continued. "Yes, finally," I replied. "Are you happy?" he asked with a twinkle in his eye. I looked at all the missiles sliding off me and just took a moment and took in the wonder of the moment. Sure, the missiles were tiny, and sure this wouldn't defend against everything, but now I finally had a layer of protection. Getting punched in the face by a golem had driven home just how weak I was, but I wasn't helpless anymore. "Yes," I said, very, very happy. And so this ends our chapter, and next week we make small changes. And what is the name of the chapter next week? Pow Pow. We stay on the beach and we get all kinds of fun stuff going on. All right, Have a great and wonderful rest of your weekend. And if it's a holiday weekend for you, have a great rest of your holiday weekend. And I'll see you next week. Take care.